it's so not about money. It's so about, you know, the things that you love. And funny enough, we have some stuff in here that had inherited from the family in Philly, including his aunt who passed away a couple years ago, had this amazing black velvet painting of Isaac Hayes in his black Moses role,
black Moses pose
in her basement where they used to hang out. Family used to play like pinochle and whatever, you know, play, you know, card games and stuff down there. Pinochle. And you know, have their dance parties in the basement. And when she passed, I used to hound her about it every year. I was like, it's in the basement. Can I have it? I really want it. And she was like, why do you want this? This is like 70s blaxploitation. I was like, this is one of the coolest things I have ever seen. I want it in the house. We have it hung up in our kitchen. And so it's just about what you love. Yeah. It is not about expensive stuff, but it's just about what you love.
And it's very much, it's really about the eye. Like, it's not the price tag, it's the eye. Yeah. Because, you know, we tell people all the time, like, we can design a place for you that looks like it should be on the cover of every magazine. And all we got to do is go to IKEA. Yeah. Like, you can go to IKEA and make it happen, you know, but it's about how you see things and how you're able to put them together.
We have a great guest today, a married couple, Jeanine Hayes and Bryan Mason. And they have a new book called Aphrochic, which debuts wherever books are sold on November 15th, 2022.
And it's out for pre-order right now. So get your copies right
now. So how would you describe them?
Wow. They're an amazing couple. First of all, they found each other. They have such great interest, and they were able to fuse their interests together. His vast knowledge of history and design and love for design, and her love for design. They just kind of put it all together. And I think they're amazing. And
and this new book, Aphrochic, it seems the intention is to break the stereotypes and preconceived notions and to shift perceptions of what we consider the legacy of the Black home.
Yes. So. And they certainly do it because the book is not just a book of design. It's definitely a little history lesson in there. So, wow.
Right. So, I mean, we started off just by talking about budget and whether or not you can have an Aphrochic home on a fixed income.
Yeah, well, a fixed income or a design on a dime. That's what I like to call it.
Design on a dime. Okay.
You collecting your Social Security right now? No, you certainly can, because it is sort of about the things that you love, putting them all together. That favorite piece of art. You have a lot of great posters from films and all, and you like hats, you like cats.
Yeah, cat's not around right now.
Yeah. So it's just about putting it all together.
Sometimes I like cats.
Yeah. I love lighting. So this simply taking a regular lamp and putting a colorful light bulb in it. That's design. That's vibe right there. So it's simple. It's the simple things.
Okay, so let's check it out.
So how you guys doing?
We're doing good.
Yeah, we're happy to be here, and thank you guys for having us.
Yes.
Now you've got a Philly connection.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, yes. Family. I mean, I don't know how long our families have been in Philadelphia, but forever. My family's from West Philly, and so, you know, we always had, you know, aunties, great grandma, everybody had, you know, homes there in West Philadelphia.
Yeah, my mom's family has been in Philly since probably the 40s, and my dad's family has been in Philly since the 20s.
Wow.
So we're like, I don't know if that's long enough to make us Philadelphia originals, but I'm a Philadelphia original. Like, we've been, you know, Philly has been home for, and it's where everybody is. You know, we can't wait to get back there. We haven't seen it in a while, you know, with the pandemic and all that, but it's always home.
Yeah, because we live in upstate New York now.
So the book is called Aphrochic, and it's celebrating the legacy of the Black family home. Now, the first thing that struck me is there's no plastic slipcovers, guys. What's going on?
Where they at?
You know, it's so funny you say that, because we were writing this book, and it's all about, you know, family history and legacy, and what African Americans have gone through to make home here in America. And of course, as we were thinking about the homes that we grew up in or would visit as kids, we were thinking about those slip covers and how your legs would get stuck to the plastic in the summer and it would hurt.
Yeah.
And we can't get it twisted. We had plenty of conversations, like almost everybody we talked to, like we talked about those slip covers, because in this book, we don't just talk about the homes that we're showing pictures of and the people who live in them. We're talking about, you know, each homeowner's actually a whole story of home. So that goes past them to their parents, their grandparents, great grandparents in some instances, and sometimes even further back than that. So you can believe that we've all had the plastic slipcover experience, the room you can't sit in experience, those plastic runners that only cover like the middle section of the floor that we still don't understand. But and that was part of the fun of doing the interviews and getting this book together, was having that conversation. It didn't matter if we were talking to people from the East Coast, the West Coast, people who were originally from Jamaica, some, you know, people who were originally from overseas, and they were even everybody. We were like,
So I kid. Aphrochic started out as a blog, correct? I mean, tell us about the book.
Oh man, you've done your history. So I mean, we started out as a blog in 2007, which now we're the old days, you know, of blogging and this whole, when everything sort of blew up. But it was really just to kind of talk about design through our own lens. And, you know, I'm a lover of interior design, have been my entire life. And I was reading all these blogs that were out there and they were great, but I just didn't see Black people. And I was like, I know Black people have nice homes. Homes have been in my family for years. So it was just something that I was wondering, why don't I see people that look like me? And Bryan and I decided to create a space for people that look like us and to tell our stories of home. And that's really over 15 years now, what this incredible journey has been now to bring us to this latest book.
And I guess we should say, let's throw it in there. We usually don't get to talk about this to the end of a conversation, but that Philadelphia connection that you're talking about is right there in the name. So that PH, you know, we had to rep Philly.
Gotcha.
Absolutely. Well, it's definitely you're celebrating the design and culture that we're all starting to know. One thing comes to mind with television. I think television has really shaped a lot of our views. And one of the shows, and I was laughing about this with Mike, that I couldn't stand to see was Good Times, their apartment. And I was like, is this the image that people think that Black homes look like? You know, and of course there were a series of other shows, but it really does, you know, make you think, you know, that, hey, when are we going to start seeing, you know, what the way Black people really are and how, and the love that we have for design.
Yes. And you don't see us enough. I think, like you said, Tesa, in mainstream media, like you said, Good Times, a lot of people still have that image of the apartment as the Black family home. And then, you know, the Cosby Show, you know, despite Bill, we always talk about Heathcliff and, you know, they had that home that for a lot of people was the first time going in to actually see a Black home. A lot of folks that we'll talk to will be like, oh yeah, I remember watching that show and seeing the art on the wall and you know, the record player and all that stuff. Black homes. Right. You know, so all of that. And so, you know, what we want is just to highlight and have more representation. I get so excited when I do watch TV and I see some really cool Black spaces. Don Cheadle, when he had his show,
which one? House of Lies.
One of the things I love was that in the background he had a really cool apartment, had like the Cuba cloth pillows and stuff. And now today he's actually in this book. Him and his wife are in this book. We are featuring their home in Hawaii, which is absolutely beautiful. His wife Bridget is an interior designer, has an incredible aesthetic. And when you look at that home, there is a story. It's just warmth. It's family. It's coming together. It's like a hug. And that's how so many of the stories in this book are.
Bridget has a really amazing story too, because, you know, focusing on her, she really, there's one of those families we talk about, you know, my family being somewhere in the 20s. We talk about her family kind of moving during the Great Migration. And so a lot of our stories touch on things like that. And so that's why a big part of the book, as much as we focus on the house stories, we do focus on that, what we call the African-American journey to home. And that starts really on a large scale for African Americans at the point of emancipation and Reconstruction, but looking at it all the way through from that point to the current moment of COVID-19. And are we still on?
Yeah. I just told you.
So looking forward to the current moment of COVID-19 and everything that's happened in between. So the focus there is being able to see in the individual stories the way that they connect to this larger narrative, and the ways in which that larger narrative is reflected in those stories. Speaking of talking about television and kind of like Good Times and the Cosby Show and these two like kind of dynamic poles, one of the things we started talking about when you start thinking about the Black family home and its presence, or more specifically its absence in the way that we talk about American history, you start to look at not only the whys and wherefores behind that, but also the effect and the impact that it has. So we do spend some time talking about pop culture and its function as a manipulation of what we think of as common knowledge, right? So not what is the Black family home, but what do we usually conceive of it as? And just like you said, it really falls into some very few, very narrow tropes of, well, I know where like celebrities live, like what I think Beyonce's house looks like, or Kevin Durant's house looks like, or something like that. Yeah. And then there's somebody famous. And then everybody else, I think, lives on the set of Good Times. And then if there's anybody in the middle, they live in houses that are just like white people's houses, basically, just normal, quote unquote. And so part of doing this study and part of doing this book is looking at the impact of that, but then also starting to diversify our understanding of the Black experience, both as homeowners and as individual human beings. Yeah.
You have a quote in the book. It says, "For a long time, the Black family home has been left out of the story of America, a missing character. It's time to write the story." So can you talk about how this new book, Aphrochic, connects to your previous book, Remix?
It is like, like we've talked about, just like a next level of the conversation. Remix was a lot about decorating and things that we saw in the Black home, like color, pattern, art, those global objects. A lot of our parents, grandparents, even us have those kinds of things in the home. And it was really about, how do you take that and tell your own story? And now this book, we're actually getting into the individual stories of these homeowners, but also telling this larger American story of Black people making home, and the challenges that we have had over centuries, but then also the triumphs that we have had. And it's a celebration in the end.
Yeah, I think Remix was really focused on sort of like how to tell a story. It had a lot more how-to, decorating tips, things like that. Yes. This book, Aphrochic, celebrating the legacy of the Black family home, is really about the story itself. So now that we've kind of gone through how the mechanics of telling it, let's really start to look at this story. And I think what was most important for us was, we didn't want to create a book that was simply, here's 16 Black people with nice homes, because as great as that would be from a representation standpoint, because we don't see books like that, it also ran the risk of being something that people could point to and say, look, Black people have nice homes, racism is done, Right. And so that would actually be, for us, we did not want to become part of the problem, because we knew going into this book that home ownership among African Americans is right now at the lowest point it's been since before the signing of the Fair Housing Act in the 60s. And that was before COVID hit. It's only gotten worse since then. So, I mean, there's no one you can talk to who hasn't telling stories of gentrification. No one you can talk to who isn't telling stories about, hassles with incoming people, new influences, things like that. So we didn't want to give a wrong impression. So as much as we wanted to focus on the joy of homeownership and what we are as homeowners and as designers, for us, it's always about Black joy in context. So usually we're dividing the two. Either we're looking at Black joy to the extent that it just becomes a hashtag, or we're looking at Black suffering to the point where it just becomes the single defining aspect of our existence. But they happen together. They develop out of each other. They are together, along with a number of other things, our whole experience. And we needed to see something that took that experience and not only looked at it as a whole, but presented it as a whole to be understood as a whole.
Yes, indeed. I like one of the quotes that you wrote in the book. It says, "The Black family home is a vibe. It's more of a feel, and it's kind of like an anti-thematic. It's about what? Can you talk about that a little bit?"
Yeah, definitely. You know, it's just kind of like every part of Black life, like Black food, Black music. You know, we have to have our own flavor with it. We don't come in and try to copy everybody else. It's like, oh, this looks good over here. I want to have this homogenous look. When I'm sure when I go into your home, Tesa, or I go to your home, Mike, you guys are going to have your own flavor, your own style.
I can see
that.
The vibes.
Yeah, like, exactly. You know, the vibes that are happening in your
spaces.
And that's something that, you know, we really want to celebrate in design. It's not something that you see often. A lot of times in home decor magazines or a lot of books that are out there, you all go through the pages and it's like, oh, it's the same. Every home feels the same. And the homes in this book, they all are completely different because it's about the individuals. It's about the family stories. We have Stacy Blake, who lives in North Carolina, who is from Jamaica, her and her husband, and their home is just full of color, full of art. Just, you know, it just feels like the Caribbean and that influence, you know, within their space. And then you can be transported to a beautiful brownstone in Brooklyn, our friend Paul Supat, who he just has this very artistic, the home is white, there's columns that he's painted blue, there's really unique artwork that's throughout the space that makes you feel almost like you're in some sort of Alice in Wonderland sort of magical garden. And each space is diverse and interesting and unique to that person. And that's what we love the most to celebrate is, like I said, just like Black food, just like Black music, you got to have your own style. You can't copy from somebody else.
And so, yeah, like Jeanine said, we have, you know, this amazing, you know, Harlem apartment that feels like it emerged straight out of the Renaissance, straight out of Harlem Renaissance. And at the same time, we have, you know, a 60+ acre ranch that's down in North Carolina with and beauty and everything. It's amazing. But in all of that is
brownstone. What time is dinner?
I know, right? We need to all go over there.
Right?
That's right.
But it's just it's amazing because the reason why you tend to see that is, you know, a lot of design books are trying to describe a style. And if you're trying to describe a style, they want to give you as many examples as possible of how to do this style within these certain parameters so that you can understand how that style functions. One of the questions that we've been presented with many times over the course of our career has been, is Black design a thing? Because we talk about it all the time, and almost every time someone will ask us afterwards, is that really a thing? And like Jeanine said, we have Black music, Black food, Black dance, you know, then why isn't there Black design? We have Scandinavian design, French design, Japanese. So the question has always been sort of, what is that? And so Remix was sort of a start of beginning to talk about that. We do touch on it in a little bit more detail to really kind of go into that vibe and how it's created and what it means. But ultimately, this idea of it being anti-thematic is, you know, as Jeanine said, like we're all trying to express ourselves, not conform to a particular thing. And so looking at it that way, if you start to understand it more from the vibe and the feel and what we need, looking at design the way we do as a cultural artifact instead of just, you know, a status symbol or just a way to make a home look good. But as a cultural artifact, you start to understand that design for Black people is fulfilling the way that it does for everyone. But for us, particularly, a set of needs that history has created specifically for our community. Needs like safety, freedom, creativity, control, representation, you know, celebration, memory. And we talk about this in the book. And because of those things, that creates a feeling that isn't necessarily tied to the specific look of here's the color palette for Black design. Here's the furniture era for Black design, because it doesn't work like that. We all have our own ways of expressing what that feeling is, but you know it when you feel it. And we had conversations with people who were like, you know, I had, you know, relatives that, you know, were very Black, but, you know, the other side of my family wasn't Black. And when I went to their houses, I didn't feel it the way that I felt it when I was home or when I was with, you know, my aunties or, you know, when I was at their house or something like that. And we all know that feeling. And we depend on it. We know that we need it, you know, and we know all of the things that it does for us. And so we just wanted to kind of take some time and put a little bit of that down on paper, just so that we could see it reflected and validated by being put into a book.
Well, I think you said it all when you say it's a vibe. You know, I know what that means, you know.
Exactly, you
You
know.
put it down on paper and you did it extremely well. I love the way you broke everything up into categories. Like you have heirloom homes, creative homes, boss homes, and then the beaten path. Like, how did you select the homes and the people that you chose, the 16 families and homes that you chose for this beautiful book?
Oh, yeah. You know, people ask that a lot. And one, I am obsessed with Instagram, and I am on there all the time looking for intriguing people to feature, whether it's, you know, for a book we're working on or some other project, some other editorial writing for a magazine or something like that. And so it's really important to me to always be looking and seeing who's out there and doing interesting stuff. But I have to admit, a lot of the people in this book were people that we just have kind of loved and known over the years. And they are all very authentic people. Like, this is their, like, these are not, you know, designer homes. Like, this is how these folks live. This is their aesthetic. This is who they are. And that was kind of where we started, was just finding those people that had that authentic vibe in their space. And you know, honestly, because Bryan, I've known so many people for years, when we called up and we're like, hey, do you want to let us into your house during a pandemic, come shoot it and all this stuff? And every person was so open and excited to share their stories and excited to sit and talk with us when we interviewed them and tell us about their family history. And we honestly just felt very honored that each of these different homes that's in there, we got to share their family story and also share their beautiful style in this book.
And I would say a lot of it really started with the magazine as well. So Aphrochic magazine is our project that we're closing in on our 10th issue. And everything that we do is for the purposes of showing African diaspora culture to the African diaspora community for our own benefit. So we're not trying to explain anything. We're not being apologists. We're not, you know, like you said, we said it's a vibe, and you got that because that's what we wanted to have happen. We were going, this is a vibe and this is how a vibe works, because we knew that the people who were going to read it's a vibe and who knew that vibe would feel that instantly. And so a lot of what the magazine is about, you know, as much as we've talked about design as a window on culture and history and society and things like that, we were always for a long time very much just talking about design, you know, just speaking through that lens. But the magazine gave us the opportunity to kind of now go through the lens and bring all of that culture together and begin talking about things like food and literature and politics and economics and all of that. So one of the things that we wanted to do with the book is always about expanding the notion of the Black experience for Black people, you know, because we can start to think of ourselves in very narrow boxes as well. So we needed to have somebody like, you know, Chef Alexander Smalls, who was this world-renowned opera singer turned world-renowned, you know, restaurateur and chef. And, you know, we needed to have people like Jason Reynolds, who are, you know, now just this amazing author who writes specifically for young Black men and who spends a lot of time going to, you know, youth organizations and things like that to find the people that he's trying to reach so that he can understand and reflect their story. And we needed, you know, people like Nanaya, who is an amazing fashion designer, you know, and she, all of her story is amazing, and like everything that she does and all of her creativity. We needed that because we had to be able to show not just, it wouldn't have worked for us to do a design book looking at just the homes of 16 Black interior designers, because that's a book that you can do, and there's a reason to do that in one book. We needed to be able to show, along with everything else, the diversity and the width and the breadth of our experience.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're talking, if you're tuning in late, we're talking with Bryan Mason, Jeanine Haynes, the authors of the new book, Aphrochic, which is available in November. But we urge you now to go pre-order it now so that the publisher knows that this is a hot item. And it's a perfect gift for the holidays, you know. So you want to pre-order it now so you have it for your gift giving time. But
Yes, two authors that are extremely passionate about what they do. I think this book should be on everybody's coffee table and in their private library. I know I'm going to definitely share it with a lot of my friends and family. It's beautiful.
Oh,
Now,
thank you.
Now you talk like, so Aphrochic it talks about the entire diaspora of people that have the Black experience, but the historical references are specific to America. No.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes. So yes, this book definitely really does focus on America and American history, and that was just where we wanted to start, because we were really looking at our own story and our own family stories, being descendants of enslaved people in the United States.
And a lot of this kind of goes back to our own backgrounds before getting into design. So, Jeanine was a policy attorney working on, Violence Against Women Act, and I was an academic and ran around getting some degrees in African diaspora studies. And so it created an interesting challenge coming from the beginning, right? Because the idea was to really tell the African-American story of home, but with the understanding that, and this was, try to get this across, while every African-American is Black, not every Black American is African-American. And so that's why you see so many homes that, we have people who are from Jamaica, we have people who are, originally from England and Ghana. Mm-hmm. So because all of that is part of the experience, but the African-American, the journey to home is tied specifically to the geography of this place and the culture of this country. So even those who have come into that story later on have come into an experience that was developing from the beginnings of specifically American slavery, and through that period of emancipation, that specific process of emancipation, Reconstruction, Civil Rights period, all of that. So this would be a very different story to tell in different places, in different parts of the diaspora. And so even when we talk about Black design and the specific set of needs that it creates, those set of needs are specific, really more or less to African-American culture, because needing something like representation, or celebration is a very different need if you are, say, for example, in Senegal or Jamaica, which is a Black country full of Black people, run by Black people, than it is in the United States, where representation and the control of what your representation looks like is a constant, unending battle for us, both in and out of the home.
Yeah, but Mike, you've hit on something that I tell Bryan all the time, like, I want to actually do more of these books. Yes. And we actually do want to start going to other parts of the diaspora. We really want to explore design and that legacy design in the Caribbean. We'd like to go over to Europe and do it. We'd like to go to the continent where you could do a bunch of different books, because there's a bunch of countries there. Yeah. So we do want to have a deeper dive into this, and we're excited because we are getting, some good pre-orders, and you know how it works. Like, right. The book has to do well in that pre-order stage, and for Black authors, it's really important for us to see that support early, so we can say to the publisher, people do want to see this, and right. and we need to do more.
To tell more Aphrochic, have more Aphrochic volumes.
Yeah. I mean, just a point of context. So, like, when we did Remix, that was the first book on design to have come out from an African-American perspective in 10 years. And we did Remix about 10 years ago. So, wow. There have been other books in the interim, but when Remix happened, that was, the publisher told us, like, this hasn't been done for a while. So we were happy to do that, and we're even happier to do this.
Well, I brought that up because I thought the history stuff was really well done and interesting, in terms of the obstacles and hurdles that are constantly placed in front of Black Americans, from being able to own property and have a place to call their home. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's a long and an ongoing story, and it was very important for us to tell us, because one of the things that actually comes up a lot in terms of just American culture and the way that we look at the present moment is we're always encouraged to look at it in isolation, as if it had nothing to do with all of the things that have come before, rather than looking at it as a cumulative process. And so we wanted to be able to show that, if you're saying that there's a lack of Black homeownership now, then that's rooted in things that have been going on for a very long time. And so we had to try to cover as much of that time span as we possibly could. So we start with emancipation and Reconstruction, and we move through the Great Depression and the Great Migration. And then we go from the Great Depression to the Great Recession in the early 2000s, all the way up to the present moment now. And what we see is constant reiterations, like different versions of the same thing. So, you see practices like redlining being created, and you see how redlining also teamed up with things like the highway construction program to destroy Black, towns and homes. Like we've all heard now about Black Wall Street, but that was just one of dozens and dozens of instances like that where Black communities were completely destroyed. It happened a few times in Philly. Even South Philly was an entirely Black neighborhood when W.B. Du Bois came to do the Philadelphia Negro, and now very much the opposite. So,
because there was a riot that occurred,
because there were riots that occurred, and so one of the things that was important to us was not only to look at the Black family home as this missing character in American history, but also what's the impact? Why is that? And you start to see that there's some very clear reasons why that happens. So, for example, we found that home ownership has at certain points made up as much as 50% of inheritances in the United States, and inheritances and made up just as much of a family's wealth. But wealth and inheritances are two major places where economies show Black communities and Black home households are far behind white households. And so we find ourselves in this position where all of the different mechanisms of systematic racism overlap. And what happens when they overlap is they kind of lend each other a sort of plausible deniability. So it's easy to see why Black people don't have great homes in this particular neighborhood, this affluent neighborhood, because, well, they don't make as much, because they don't get educated as much, because so on and so forth. And now you can read any number of studies showing that this isn't true and this isn't the case. But this is where we get back to pop culture and common knowledge and just the understanding. You don't have to think about why you don't see Black people in certain places. You just instinctively know that we don't belong there, or that we don't do enough to be in those places. And so, starting to touch on some of those instances, starting to pull on a few of those threads, we're really hoping with this book to start a much bigger conversation on, how, but also why Black people are kept out of homes and why our homes are never really talked about.
Yeah, and I think also like the historic journey to me in the book is one of the things that was really beautiful, because it's hard. It's been hard, like from the beginning in this country. And I think that a lot of people, we go into the fact that, when the emancipation occurs, people think like, oh, everybody just, especially with all these weird Juneteenth events and sales and whatever's going on these days, that like people just ran out in the streets, and I don't know what they think. We just somehow like ran out. We got homes, we got money. The government took care of us, and it's just been, it's just been good from there. And you're like, well, one, when people were enslaved, there was no home. Your slave quarters were actually utilized as other spaces for the big house.
Yeah.
People grew up in the kitchen, the stove. Exactly. There was no idea of home in that situation. Then emancipation occurs, and African Americans are put out onto the streets. And for many years in the South, Black people died in what we would think of as refugee camps today. Sickness, disease, not being cared for. People did not have they didn't have any way to buy a home after something like that. But then we went on and we created communities. Like Bryan talked about, Black Wall Street, and we know that in Philadelphia there were uprisings, there were riots that actually destroyed those communities. And still we rebuilt. We went back and went, okay, this happened. We rebuilt our communities. And then you go through the Great Migration, the South, and Jim Crow, and all that happens there, this violence where you can't feel comfortable at home because somebody may come and get you at home and do some terrible things to you. And we have those stories of people leaving and during the Great Migration, going up north, going to the West, trying to find opportunity for our families to thrive. Then we get up north and we, get to these places, gentrification, redlining, white flight that destroys communities where we're trying to move in to have opportunity, but still we continue to thrive. And I think that to me is one of the more beautiful parts of our story is the challenges have always been there, and yet we continue to work to overcome them, whether it's through legislation, whether it's through just community and grassroots efforts. We are always working to make America the home that we deserve to have here. And that journey home story in the book, that journey of history, to me is just one of our incredible resilience. I don't know how we do it. Like, I don't know how Black people keep getting up and doing it, but we do. And every home, I feel like every Black home is a miracle. Somebody prayed for that. Families worked hard for that.
Mama prayed
for that. I mean, this is a miraculous moment for us, and we have to keep still moving forward. But we're in a better place.
The journey is ongoing. I mean, and so that's what we hope comes through in the book, is that it's not, we had to do the history as comprehensively as we did, because if we focused only on the Great Depression era or the Emancipation era, it would have been too easy for people to go, wow, it was really a shame back then. But so glad that we don't have to go through that now. It was about showing that what we're going through now, even with COVID and the way that COVID has hit Black communities. And we started seeing it from the very beginning. People going, well, here's how it's breaking down. Who's going to the hospital, who's dying, and Black people and Latinos and all of this, and then white people over here. And we're sitting there going, what does it take for someone to even begin to think about breaking down the kill count of a virus by race? Like, why was that even our first instinct to start doing it that way? And we're still doing it now. And the reason was because, and we see in so many ways, and this book actually shows in so many ways, that Black communities have been positioned to take the brunt of any bad moment, whatever it could be, whether it's COVID, Katrina, they've been part of the reason why there has been so little homeownership since the Great Recession, is that Black workers, Black households, Black homeowners were positioned to take the worst part of that. And while white America recovered very quickly and very thoroughly, even at the point when COVID hit, Black America was still limping along, trying to make its way back from that moment, which happened in 2009. COVID showed up in 2019, 2020. So, and this is still something that's going on. But, as Jeanine said, with the beauty of the experience, and one of the things that really presented itself to us, it was so amazing as we went through it, was this kind of realization that African Americans, and specifically we're talking about African Americans, have had every American experience in this point. Before emancipation, we were enslaved and we were free. Afterwards, we were treated as refugees, huddled in and around army camps. Some of us made the immediate transition from being, released from these plantations, making it to Union lines and being immediately incarcerated. They just put them in prisons because they didn't know what else to do with them. So they were like, well, throw them in jail. And they stayed there for years. We've been immigrants during the Great Migration. 1, 2, 3 brave people taking a shot, going someplace to another land, someplace where they didn't know anybody, didn't have any money, finding a foothold, and then working until they could start bringing other members of the family over, everyone living in one house, everyone working as maids or as garbage men or whatever we would think of as being the menial tasks of then or now. And then to the point where the family grew. Some people started businesses, some people started families, and little by little they were able to move out and find other homes. That was my family. It was my mother's family coming to Philadelphia from Virginia and South Carolina, and so the more we talk to people, the more we realize that our experience is every American experience. And so it connects to every American experience. And when you look at this story of the journey to home and its peaks and valleys and its accomplishments and its setbacks, they line up perfectly with some of the biggest moments in American history. So its absence, its omission is not an element, is not a loss in terms of Black history. This is about American history. This is about world history. And we have to begin to change the narrative between our history being seen as a subset of history.
Yeah, well, I wanted Tesa ask the next question, but just to follow up, you do make it clear in the book that there were free blacks before emancipation, right? So, just for people in the chat who are listening. And then also, you also make it very clear that your definition of blackness is not defined by oppression or state of oppression.
No. Yeah, Bryan went to Berkeley, right? I think there was a professor that told you that, and he's very adamant about.
Shout out my professor. Yes, that did happen. There was, yeah, and I mean, it's not rare.
Right. So it's not like a "We Shall Overcome" kumbaya book. Like, oh, we finally got it. Oh, look at that bookshelf. We made it to the promised land.
Oh no, like he said, there's going to be volumes. I'm sure that you guys are going to continue to write, but this is way more than just a design book. It's definitely a history book as well. And I think that it's going to pique the interest of so many people. It's going to not only have them reading your book, but also going to the internet, going to the library, saying, oh, I need to study this. I need to know more about this, because there's so much that the generations have lost through the lack of proper teaching of history. One of my favorite historians is Dr. Claude Anderson, who we do plan to bring onto the show. He covers so much of that in depth, all the things you just talked about. And it's just so invigorating to me to hear other African Americans speaking about this, because the conversation starts it all. I love history. I love design. I love you guys. We are just so overjoyed to have you here at this moment.
Let me ask you a question. Looking at the book, did you get any specific design ideas from looking at the photographs in the book?
You're asking me?
Yeah. I'm just curious.
Oh yeah. I love all the brilliant colors and definitely the African art, because I collect masks myself. So just some of the positioning, I do a lot of things on my own. Like I've been in this world, this whole interior loving. Sometimes I'll even watch, I hate to admit it, like a reality show just to see the inside of the house. And I've really seen pieces of art and furniture that's in my house, actually. But no, I will continue to probably gravitate toward the book to get ideas. I love it. It's just beautiful.
Oh, well, we are so glad to hear
heart
that.
And soul in it, and just I'm reading the digital copy right now, obviously, but just having that book in hand, I just see it as something that's a reference, not something that I'll read and put down. I will put it down and pick it back up. So
yes.
And I'd say one of the things I was really excited about the book, being like a former Berkeley academia nerd, is the book actually does have a short bibliography in it at the end, just to say, not only, first and foremost, obviously, because,
it's education.
Right. We know what the deal is. So you had to be able to say, this is where we got this information from.
Sure.
But, also just so that people can go on and continue to read some other things. And there's some great pieces in there from, like Black economists. There are some pieces in there, some actual studies in there done by Congress. And one really, really fun one that's actually on the Black West, and all of the cowboys and the trackers and the lawmen and all these other people. Like, we all know Bass Reeves, but Bass Reeves was part of a very, very big community of people that were out there, some of whom have been completely omitted from history, some of whom have been whitewashed and presented as European Americans in other places and things like that. But that is all part of what we call in the book, we call the hard work of forgetting. Because when you realize, when you start to look at this history and you look at the number of things that have happened that nobody has really heard about, the number of processes that went on in politics that were contemporary at the time and that continue to resonate today, that weren't really focused on then and aren't ever really referenced or thought about now, you realize how hard it is to excise a people from their own story, from the story of their own country. And it's not about just forgetting that something happened. It's about, as we said again, shaping common knowledge so that you don't have to work to forget. The general understanding is that these things never could have happened in the first place. So when you talk about people who were free before emancipation. You know, in Remix, we talk about Thomas Day. You know, there's a carpenter in North Carolina who, before emancipation, essentially owned the town that he lived in, had the biggest buildings, the biggest house was his home and his workshop. And he, like, if you were, as a plantation owner, if you wanted to show anybody you had any kind of wealth or status, you had to have this man's pieces. Yeah. University of North Carolina still has his pieces on their campus. Yeah. And, but common knowledge is that didn't happen. And it couldn't have happened. And his story wasn't the only one. So
I think that the intention of your book is not only to break stereotypes, but also to shift these perceptions that people have. So that's why I was saying, like, you know, hey, you know, where's the plastic slip covers? You know, this ain't no black book. There's no Ernie Barnes painting on the wall, you know,
right.
that kind of thing. So I think it's important for any as much as we can to discuss, especially when you've done the research. Why does America have such a hard time accepting Black success, Black wealth, Black opulence, Black taste, you know, within our culture?
Yeah, I think it's Blackness in general. I think that, you know, in America, it is by design that we are not made to feel comfortable here, not ever supposed to get too comfortable, you know.
But do you think we always started there? I mean, I think we got to go further back. Like you're saying, in America, you're 100% right, but it definitely goes back to the motherland, to Africa, from where it all began. I mean,
yeah, Bryan probably could give more of that because he studied.
I know he could.
He's a historian.
All right, so here's the interesting thing. So the first thing I would say that we need to know, and like, I'm excited. So we're gonna have some fun. All right. So I would say that, like, the first thing that needs to be understood is that racism, as we understand it today, and as it's developed over the last several hundred years, is not eternal. It had a beginning point, and because it had a beginning point, it can have an ending point. A lot of it happened in the 1800s. So I think we have a quote in there from George Hegel, who I actually learned in Berkeley. Like, I had so much Hegel stuff in that place. And so it was amazing to me to come across this quote later on after school and realize this idea of that Africa has no history. You know, it has not created or anything that humankind has enjoyed. It has no movement to demonstrate, you know? But you see that idea continued over and over and over again. But if you go far enough back, there's this author that I really like, and I hope I'm going to get his name right. It's David Basil. I remember the last name is Basil. And he does a lot. He's done a series of good books. You know, white British author, but he's done a lot of good books on pre-colonial African kingdoms and civilizations.
Basil Davidson?
Basil Davidson. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I was so close. You know, but he does a lot of good stuff on that. And so it's important to kind of realize that there was a point where this came and a point where it's turned. Another book that's really good is called Capitalism and Slavery. And it really looks at the triangular trade and, you know, the development of racism almost as a necessity of the labor requirements of New World agriculture. So once people got here and they started, New World agriculture is incredibly labor intensive. So, you know, European powers, you can't afford to pay everybody who's going to be doing it because all your profits will be gone. And they couldn't, you know, draw from their own communities, their own countries to populate these plantations because they didn't have enough people. And they couldn't go to war with each other to get those, although they kind of tried both of those things early on, because they were too evenly matched and they destroyed each other. Nobody would make any money. But over in Africa, you know, here was a trade that was already in process. It was a slave trade that was already going on. And so they came and they helped to stimulate a trade that was already happening. It wasn't initially like we saw it in Roots where white people were just coming kind of like picking black people out of trees like we were fruit and all that. You know, there was a long time and several hundred years of negotiations, showing deference to African rulers, lost wars because they didn't understand how to fight in a different environment. things like that. But slowly, little by little, we got towards the situation that we're in today, largely because people overinvested and they were like, oh, well, I can get money into things that I want by just giving you people that I don't recognize as being my people. Because you have to remember that Africa is not necessarily an African concept. The idea of that as a singular, as a singular unified element is, you know, something that came from outside. So, you know, all of that kind of plays in. And then you know, to your point, Tesa, you see the progression of New World slavery, but you also have to watch the progression of colonialism in Africa and recognize that they follow very similar trajectories.
Yeah.
So I mean, it becomes a very knotted and distinct thing. But as you go through it, you start to see the fracture points in it. You start to see the fallacies in it. Obviously, you start to recognize it's important that if you go back far enough, you know, Africa was considered, you know, actually the pinnacle of the world. You know, if you like read the Iliad and the Odyssey in Homer, you know, they thought that Ethiopia was where the Greek gods went when they got tired of being in Olympus. Ethiopia was where they went on vacation. You know, part of that story, it actually pertains to an Ethiopian prince that goes to fight for choice. So all of these amazing things. Basically anything that like Ivan van Sertima would write about, you know, the Moors or about, you know, African presence in early Europe or in early Asia, things like that. And then we hit this moment, and then things kind of develop and continue on from here. So, I mean, in terms of like why it is that it's so hard for America to kind of countenance, you know, Blackness, to just kind of let us be. You got to kind of think of the, you know, slavery and all of its fallout are sort of the foundational trauma of this nation. You know, so even if there was a specific reason for it at one point, you know, at that point of plantation agriculture, a lot of things just became habit, you know, and it became, well, I have to see you as less than human in order to do what I'm doing to you, in order to get what I'm getting.
Right, which is that dollar, the almighty dollar, because it all has to do with money.
And that's the process that continues, right? Because there's still money in our oppression.
Yes.
There's still money in keeping us out. And it's easier to keep us out by making it so that everyone forgets that we were ever capable of doing anything. Yeah. So I mean, and that affects, you know, white people as much as it affects us. I mean, I remember in a conversation with a white person who thought that white people had invented harmony. You know, like some white person in like the 70s that had specifically invented harmony, and we're like, yeah, no, that is not how that works at all. But you know. But this is what it's about. It's about skewing perceptions. Yeah.
And I think that leaving us out just from the design world, the design conversation is, you know, just part of, like Bryan talked about, that dehumanization that happens, particularly in the 1800s, when we start to see racism as we all live through it today, beginning. You know, that, yeah, you don't have a home, you know, you can't have nice things. You can't develop an aesthetic because you're not fully human. You're not someone who is deserving of those things. One of the things that we're really excited about with this book is actually we're starting to have new conversations in our industry and design where we're talking to people and they're like, oh, it's kind of interesting when I'm talking to designers or design programs, they're only talking about design from a Eurocentric perspective. And we're like, that's incorrect, right? Because everyone has design. Everyone had to come up with solutions of building spaces where we could have protection from the elements. We all had to come up with solutions of how to make those spaces comfortable. Rugs, chairs, tables to eat on. How are you going to share food? How was the family going to be together? That is a human experience and we all have it. And there are so many beautiful cultures all around the world who do that in distinct ways, which we should be celebrating. And so if we're only looking at things through a Eurocentric lens, or if we were only looking at the world even just through a Black lens, how limited, how sad is that, all that we are missing. So we are glad that we've written something that we hope opens people's eyes to the African-American experience. But I also hope that it starts to get people to think and go, there's so much other culture out there that I'm not exploring and that I want to learn more about, because that really is a part of design and ultimately that's a part of the human experience.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. Any final question, Tesa?
When is the book out for release? When will it be released? The book.
So the book is officially out on November 15th, and you know, it feels like a long way away, but we know that we'll be here before we know it. It is available for pre-order now at all your favorite places to get books online, but it'll be out November 15th, and that, like Mike said, that's right before we all go crazy and start that holiday shopping. So it really is the perfect book for the holidays. It's for people who love design like you, Tesa. It's for people that want to get into history in a deeper way. It's for people who want to be inspired. So we want this to be a book that is not just for people who are interior designers, but for those who really want to explore also more of the Black story.
Yeah.
And that is the key word, inspire. Inspiration can start a lot of things. So I felt very inspired when I read it. What is your, how can people reach you on Instagram?
Yeah, so we are on all the social media channels at Aphrochic. Like Bryan said, it's PH because we represent Philadelphia, where we're from. So if they go to Aphrochic, APHROCHIC, we're there. Instagram, we're there on Pinterest, we're there on TikTok. We try to be everywhere in terms of having this conversation about design and the Black experience.
And of course, also at our website, aphrochic.com.
Aphrochic.com, all social media platforms. They have a magazine, aphrochic.com. It's amazing how many avenues you're taking this. When you started off blogging and now you have 2 books under your belt. I'm sure there's going to be many more to come. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, thank you guys so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.